The sky over Seattle was painted in shades of soft grey as the rain drizzled gently over the streets. Inside a small, cozy cafe tucked in the corner of Fifth Avenue, a young man sat alone by the window, staring blankly at the world outside. His name was Ethan Parker, a 28-year-old who once believed he was destined to conquer the world. But today, his world seemed smaller than ever. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the table. His phone buzzed again, another email rejection. His latest startup pitch had failed, just like the last two. Investors had pulled out. Rent was overdue. His dreams were collapsing, one failure at a time. He ran his fingers through his messy brown hair and sighed. "Maybe I'm just not meant for this," he muttered under his breath. At that very moment, a voice interrupted him. "You look like someone who just lost his best friend." Ethan turned around. Standing beside him was an elderly man with kind eyes and a warm smile. He looked to be in his late 60s, wearing a worn-out brown jacket and holding an umbrella dripping with rainwater. Ethan gave a small, tired laugh. "Something like that?" The old man smiled and nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan hesitated for a second but gestured to the seat. "Sure, go ahead." The man placed his umbrella against the wall, ordered a cup of black coffee and leaned forward. "Name's Arthur Blake," he said, extending his hand. "Ethan," the young man replied, shaking it. Arthur studied Ethan quietly for a moment before saying, "You look like someone who's carrying a lot on his shoulders." Ethan chuckled bitterly. "You could say that. I had dreams, big ones, but they're slipping away. Every time I try, I fail. I've poured everything I had into my work and still, nothing works out." Arthur didn't speak right away. He simply listened, nodding, his eyes soft with understanding. After a long pause, he said, "You know, Ethan, failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it." Ethan frowned. "That's easy to say when you've already succeeded." Arthur smiled faintly. "You think I haven't failed?" Ethan didn't respond. The old man took a deep breath and looked out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Arthur's story. I used to be a carpenter," Arthur began. "Had my own workshop downtown. For years I built furniture, chairs, tables, cabinets, you name it. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest work. I had a wife and a daughter, Emily. She was the light of my life." He smiled faintly at the memory. "When Emily turned 10, she used to come to my workshop after school, sit on a pile of wood shavings and watch me work. She'd ask questions, laugh at my bad jokes, and tell me one day she wanted to build something of her own." Ethan listened quietly, drawn in by the old man's calm voice. "But one winter," Arthur continued, "a fire broke out in my workshop. Everything burned down, every tool, every piece of furniture, every dream I'd built with my own hands, all gone." He took a slow sip of coffee. "The insurance barely covered the damage. We had to sell our house to pay debts. I felt like the world had ended. My wife tried to comfort me, but I couldn't see anything beyond my loss. I stopped smiling. I stopped building. I stopped living." Ethan's heart ached as he listened. "One evening," Arthur said softly, "my daughter came to me holding a small wooden box. It was rough, uneven, and not very pretty. She said, 'Dad, I made this from the wood scraps I found outside the workshop.' I looked at it and saw her eyes filled with pride. Then she said something that broke me inside." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. She said, "You can always build again, Daddy. You taught me that." Arthur looked at Ethan with eyes that carried both pain and peace. "That night I cried for the first time in years. My 10-year-old had taught me something I'd forgotten, that as long as you're breathing, you can start over. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. So I did. I started again, small jobs, small projects. It took years, but I rebuilt everything, not just my workshop, but my life. I lost my wife later to illness, but I never stopped building. I turned my pain into purpose, and now, every time I make something new, I remember Emily's words. Arthur smiled gently. A few months ago, my daughter graduated with a degree in architecture. She told me she's ready to build her own world now. The cafe was quiet for a long time. Only the sound of rain filled the silence. Ethan finally spoke. That's powerful. I don't know what to say. Arthur chuckled. You don't have to say anything, son. Just remember, life isn't about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you rise. Ethan looked down at his hands. But what if I don't have the strength to try again? Arthur smiled and reached for his umbrella. Then you start small. You take one step, then another. Before you know it, you're walking again. He stood up and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Here's my workshop address. Come by sometime. I could use an extra pair of hands, and maybe you could use a little sawdust on your dreams. Ethan took the paper, surprised. You'd really let me help? Arthur winked. Everyone deserves a new beginning. With that, he left, disappearing into the soft drizzle outside. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Arthur's story, about rebuilding from ashes. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The next morning, he visited Arthur's workshop. It was a small wooden shed filled with tools, half-finished chairs, and the comforting scent of pine wood. Arthur was already working, humming softly to himself. Thought you might not show up, Arthur said with a grin. Ethan smiled shyly. I almost didn't. But then I figured, maybe it's time I build something too. Good, Arthur said, handing him a block of wood. Then let's start. Days turned into weeks. Ethan worked beside Arthur, sanding wood, fixing shelves, learning patience. There was something healing about the rhythm, the sound of the saw, the feel of the wood, the satisfaction of creating something real. And slowly, without even realizing it, Ethan began to rebuild himself. He stopped chasing quick success and started valuing the process. He understood what Arthur meant, that life is built, not found. It takes time, mistakes, and the courage to begin again. A year later, Ethan opened his own small design studio, a mix of art, craftsmanship, and heart. On the wall above his desk hung a wooden plaque Arthur had given him. It read, "You can always build again." Every time Ethan looked at it, he smiled, because now he knew failure wasn't the end, it was a lesson, a painful, powerful teacher that shaped him into someone stronger. He often visited Arthur, who now proudly introduced him as my friend, the man who refused to give up. One evening, as the two of them watched the sunset from the workshop porch, Ethan said softly, "Arthur, I think I finally get it." Arthur smiled. Get what? That life isn't about having everything go your way. It's about learning to keep going when it doesn't. Arthur nodded, his eyes gleaming. That's the lesson, my boy. That's the life lesson. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And in that quiet moment, Ethan realized something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest lessons come not from winning, but from losing and finding the strength to rise again. Moral of the story: life will break you, challenge you, and test your limits. But every failure holds a lesson. Every loss hides a new beginning. Don't give up when things fall apart. Learn, rebuild, and grow. Because as long as you're alive, you can always start over. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to EchoMind Worlds, where stories come alive and hearts find hope again. Thank you for watching, and remember, every ending can be a new beginning.